agreements that they made to them was just a piece of paper. Just words. They didn't have to adhere to them. They were just words. Then he said, there was no affection for the family. And you remember we talked about fus, that word fus, which means natural, nature, right? There was no natural family affection. There ought to be a natural sense in which, we love. And particularly he's talking about the husband and wife or male to female. And it just wasn't natural. It just wasn't there. It wasn't flowing. And they were without mercy again. And then he goes on to say in verse 32, and although they knew the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things were worthy of death. Look at this, check it out. Look at what happened. They not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who are also in rebellion to fus, nature. Now, of course, we stay contextually together here because we're talking about this homosexual, lesbian lifestyle. Is that what we were talking about? I don't want you to lose what we're talking about. So then, those persons who practice those kinds of things are guilty of, and he talks about their being full of all of these kinds of things. And then we talked about in our illustrations how when we are sympathetic to that, and we're sympathetic to the homosexual lesbian lifestyle, it is because we don't understand fus. And what we understand is what we want to understand. So therefore, we are without understanding in the presence of God. Y'all tracking me? And most folks who are without understanding would right away assume and suggest that the preacher who talks about this alternative lifestyle is putting people down. There's some heterosexuals in here today who maybe didn't sleep in their own bed last night. So we can't be just putting them in the corner. 1 Corinthians talks about some effeminate. There's some folks that just seem real feminine, real men. And the Bible says that effeminates won't go. Those who want to pretend to be, if they're really not. They don't go. So I'm not talking about, in this context of trying to explain this verse, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about lifestyle. And we looked in Leviticus chapter 18, and we discovered all of the things that God said that was inappropriate. Y'all remember that? So now Paul comes to chapter 2. And in chapter 2, he was trying to help the Jews and the Gentiles understand this one thing. That the real judge of humankind, the creatures like you and I, is God. Now we can look at the lifestyle, even though we preached about homosexuality last week or week before, whatever it is. Even though we preached about it, listen, I told you I got my good friend is a lesbian. Now, I don't agree with the lifestyle, but at the same time, I don't crucify her. Because I got to be careful that what I'm doing, I'm also not being crucified myself. So y'all follow me? So we're not talking about killing people, we're talking about a lifestyle. And I mentioned to you in my research that I asked her, I said, listen, help me. I'm getting ready to preach through Romans, chapter 1 in particular, 18 through 24. And I want to know from your position, what do you think it says? And you remember I told you. She said, well, it's on the word natural. I said, okay. Yeah, see, it doesn't mean what you think it means. It means that there was something in nature that was skewed. I said, oh, okay, I'm listening. And she didn't know I know Greek. She just knows, hey, we hide, I said, oh, okay, I'm going to look that up. Anything else? She said, yeah, here's a couple, 3 authors you can look at. And they'll help bear this out. Oh, good. So I wrote down little authors and looked them up. And you remember, you always look at, kind of the history of the person, when they're teaching, look where you study or whatever, And, you can be an educated fool too, right? Okay. And so when I looked up the word and looked in the context of this, I'm waiting to talk to her again. She's kind of like too busy now. She hadn't gotten around to get back to me. Because that word "fus" is powerful. And if I was to take her position, then I would have to say that God made a mistake. And that in nature, he allowed some to be twisted in their mind. But see, the only problem with that is, remember the gay ministry I told you about, reported on last week? That the lady was a lesbian, and she talked about how she got caught up in that lesbian lifestyle for about 10 years. And then she said, she realized she was in church, but church wasn't in her. And that the closer she began to get to God, the more she saw herself as a sinner. And the more she saw that that was not God's design for her to be with another woman. And so then she stopped that relationship and eventually got married. Remember? I don't know if y'all had any opportunity to further investigate this, but I wouldn't be afraid of it because, listen, it was just like when AIDS was real popular, in terms of people had AIDS, we didn't know whether to touch somebody. That's what happens here. And so then we start judging whether we should touch them, whether we should, drink after them. You don't know who you're drinking after. Anyway, you don't know who you're sitting beside right now. You don't know what their experiences are, do you? Absolutely not. So we got this phobia. They say, I don't have a homosexual phobia. If I have to deal with you in some way, I'll deal with you in some way. But in my mind, I know what you're doing is not right. Anybody in here with me? Because I believe the word "fus" means natural, and that means nature, and that is what God gave me while I was in my mother's womb. My mother, remember I told you, was all excited about that. Remember that? And anybody who's had a baby in here, you understand that when that doctor told you that it was a boy or a girl, your orientation changed. Am I right? And then for that child to somehow slip out of your hands and find themselves in the hands of another man, if it's a boy, or another woman, if it's a girl. Would that be disappointing to you? Come on, tell the truth. Would that be disappointing to you? Now, would you still love the child? Yes. Yes, you would. Yes, you would. And when you try to find all kind of reasons not to judge him, but to try to understand him, would you do that? And some of us, to our detriment, we've done that and somehow negated what God said. You follow me? And so then we got our little sign up, no on 8, now, it may not have, we say it doesn't affect me at all, but that's somebody else's right. They want to do that. But then you come to worship, you come to church. How can you lift your hands? And so verse 31, it says, and then you give hearty approval to those who practice those things. So somebody's going to judge. I can't. But God will. And so he says in verse 1, look at verse 1 with us, please. Chapter 2, verse 1. He says, therefore, and I want to talk about that God judges everyone, and there is absolutely no excuse.